I watched through my security cameras as my father walked onto my property with a realtor and my golden child brother Danny pointing at my ranch house like he owned the place. 3 weeks after cutting me out of Christmas dinner because I wasn't successful enough for the family image here, he was with clipboards and measuring tape planning to sell the land I'd bought with my own blood and sweat. What they didn't know was that I had backup they never saw coming, and this trespassing stunt was about to backfire spectacularly. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday evening in early December. I was fixing a broken fence post on the Henderson Ranch where I worked my hands numb from the cold Montana wind when my mother Sarah's voice cut through the speaker like a blade. "Joe, your father and I have been talking," she began, that particular tone she used when delivering bad news. "We've decided it would be best if you didn't come to Christmas dinner this year." I dropped my hammer. 28 years of family Christmas traditions, and suddenly I wasn't welcome anymore. "What do you mean?" "Mom, what happened?" "Well, you know how important this gathering is for your father's business connections. The Johnsons will be there and the Parkers from the country club. Your brother Danny is bringing his new girlfriend Amanda, who works at the bank downtown." She paused, and I could practically hear her choosing her words carefully. "We just think it might be awkward given your current employment situation." Employment situation, like being a ranch hand was some kind of disease. "Mom, I work 60 hours a week. I've been saving money, paying my own bills, never asked you for anything since I turned 18. "That's not the point, Joseph." Now she was using my full name, which meant the conversation was over in her mind. "Your father has worked very hard to build relationships in this community. When people ask what our sons do for a living, it's just easier to talk about Danny's real estate career, you understand." No, I didn't understand. I didn't understand how the son who showed up for every family emergency, who helped them move 3 times, who drove 8 hours to be at Dad's side when he had his heart attack, suddenly wasn't good enough to eat Christmas dinner with people I'd never met. "So Danny gets to bring his girlfriend, but I can't even come alone. Danny has a college degree, Joe. He's building something. He just closed a deal on that new development by the lake. He's making something of himself." Making something of himself? The words hit like a physical blow. I'd been making something of myself for years, just not the kind of something that looked good in holiday photos. After I hung up, I sat in my truck outside the Henderson Ranch until my girlfriend Lisa found me there an hour later. She worked as a waitress at Murphy's Diner in town, and she'd driven out after her shift ended. "Bad news?" she asked, sliding into the passenger seat. I told her everything. About the phone call, about being disinvited from my own family's Christmas, about how they were ashamed of what I did for a living. Lisa listened without interrupting, her green eyes getting angrier with every detail. "Joe, you've been talking about buying property for 2 years now. You've got more money saved than most people our age. Why don't you do something that'll really shock them?" She was right. I'd been working 3 jobs for the past 5 years. Ranch hand during the day, bartender at the Rusty Spur on weekends, and I'd been doing odd carpentry jobs whenever I could find them. While my friends were spending money on trucks and vacations, I'd been living in a small apartment above Murphy's Diner and putting everything I earned into savings. "The old Whitman Ranch is still for sale," I said slowly. "Martha Whitman told me last month she's ready to move to that assisted living place in Billings." "How much land?" 200 acres. House, barn, mineral rights included. She's asking $140,000, but I think she'd take $120 if the buyer was someone she trusted. Lisa grabbed my hand. "You've got the money." I did. I had $137,000 in my savings account. Money I'd earned by getting up at 5 in the morning and working until dark, by never taking vacations, by driving a beat-up Chevy pickup that was older than I was. Joe, imagine their faces when they find out you own 200 acres and they didn't even invite you to Christmas dinner. That night I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to tell my family about the ranch purchase. I was going to buy it quietly, build something real, and let them figure out on their own that they'd judged me wrong. But there was something else about the Whitman property that I hadn't told anyone, not even Lisa. 6 months earlier, I'd overheard a conversation at the Rusty Spur between 2 men in expensive suits. They'd been drinking heavily and talking about mineral surveys, about oil deposits, about how certain properties in our county were sitting on reserves that could make landowners very wealthy. They'd mentioned the Whitman Ranch specifically. I'd spent weeks researching, driving to the county office in the next town over, looking up geological surveys and mineral rights records. What I found made my heart race. The Whitman property sat directly over what geologists estimated could be a significant oil deposit. Martha Whitman had no idea, and apparently neither did anyone else in my family. I was about to make the smartest investment of my life, and my family had just told me I wasn't successful enough to eat dinner with them. Martha Whitman met me on her front porch the next morning, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing the same blue dress she'd worn to church for the past 20 years. At 78, she moved slowly, but her mind was sharp as ever. "Joe Brennan, what brings you out here so early?" she asked, pouring coffee from a thermos into 2 metal cups. "I want to buy your ranch, Mrs. Whitman." She studied my face for a long moment. "You serious about this, son? This isn't something you decide overnight." I pulled out a folder I'd prepared the night before. Inside were bank statements, employment verification letters, and a pre-approval letter from Mountain Valley Credit Union. "I've been thinking about it for months. I know you want to move closer to your daughter in Billings." Martha opened the folder and read through everything carefully. "You've been saving for this?" "Yes, ma'am, 5 years. Most young people your age want to live in town close to restaurants and entertainment. This place is 15 miles from the nearest neighbor." "I like the quiet, always have." She nodded slowly. "Your family know about this?" I hesitated. "Not yet. I wanted to make sure it was possible first." "Your daddy's Frank Brennan works at the insurance office, me too." "Yes, ma'am." "And your brother sells real estate?" "Danny, yes." Martha was quiet for several minutes, sipping her coffee and looking out across the pasture where her late husband's cattle had once grazed. "Joe, I'm going to tell you something that might interest you. Your brother's been out here 3 times in the past 2 months." My stomach dropped. "Danny's been here, asking questions about whether I'd consider selling, what my asking price might be. Brought some slick-looking fellow with him last time, fellow in an expensive suit who kept talking about development opportunities." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the December morning. "What kind of development?" Didn't say exactly, but they were real interested in the mineral rights. Kept asking if those were included in any potential sale. Now I understood why my family was suddenly so concerned about my employment situation. Danny had been scouting the Whitman property, probably planning to make an offer himself or bring in some investor group. My being here making a serious offer complicated whatever plan he'd been developing. "Mrs. Whitman, I want to make you an offer right now. $120,000 cash closing within 2 weeks." She smiled for the first time that morning. "You know what, Joe? I like you. I've watched you work for the Hendersons, seen how you treat people, how you handle responsibility. That brother of yours has a smooth way of talking, but you've got something more important." "What's that?" "Character." We shook hands on the front porch, and Martha said she'd have her lawyer draw up the papers. I told her I wanted to hire my own legal representation, and she recommended a firm in the county seat. That afternoon, I drove to Bozeman and met with Jessica Torres at Torres & Associates. Jessica was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with black hair pulled back in a professional ponytail and sharp brown eyes that missed nothing. "You want to purchase 200 acres with mineral rights included?" she asked, reading through Martha's preliminary offer. "Yes. Is there anything I need to be concerned about?" Jessica spent an hour reviewing county records, mineral surveys, and property histories. "This is interesting, Joe. There have been several inquiries about this property in recent months. Someone's been doing research on the mineral rights." "What kind of research?" "Geological surveys, oil and gas potential assessments. Whoever's been looking into this property thinks there might be something valuable under the ground." I played dumb. "Is that good or bad for me?" "Depends on what you want to do with the land. If you're planning to ranch cattle and live quietly, it doesn't matter much. If there really are mineral deposits and you own the rights, it could be very good for you financially." Jessica handled the entire transaction with impressive efficiency. She arranged for a title search coordinated with Martha's lawyer and set up the closing for the following Friday. She also suggested I install security measures on the property. "Why would I need security?" I asked. "Because word gets around in small towns, Joe. If people think there might be oil or gas under your land, you could have unexpected visitors. People who think they can make deals behind your back or who might try to pressure you into selling before you understand what you own." I took her advice and contacted a security company in Billings. They installed motion-activated cameras around the perimeter of the property, as well as hidden microphones near the main entrances. The whole system connected to an app on my phone so I could monitor the property even when I wasn't there. The closing went smoothly. Martha signed the papers with a satisfied smile, and I handed over a cashier's check for $120,000. Just like that, I owned 200 acres of Montana ranch land. "Joe," Martha said as we walked to our trucks after signing, "there's something else you should know, that Sheriff's Deputy Tom Bradley, he's been asking around town about who might be interested in buying my place." "Sheriff Bradley knows I bought it." "I told him this morning. He said he'd like to meet you, welcome you to the community proper. Said it was just a courtesy call, but I got the feeling there was more to it." That evening, Sheriff Bradley knocked on the door of my new ranch house. He was a tall man in his early 40s with graying hair and the kind of steady presence that made people trust him instinctively. "Joe Brennan, I'm Tom Bradley. Thought I'd stop by and introduce myself." We sat on the front porch drinking coffee, and Tom got straight to the point. "Your father's been asking questions around town about who bought the Whitman place. Called the county office twice this week trying to get information about the buyer." My blood went cold. "He knows it was me." "Not yet. County records take a few days to update, and the clerk happened to be out sick when he called, but he'll figure it out soon enough." Tom leaned back in his chair. "Your brother Danny's been more persistent. Drove by here twice yesterday real slow, like taking pictures." "Pictures of what?" "The house, the barn, the property markers, like he was documenting something." I felt a knot forming in my stomach. My family hadn't just cut me out of Christmas dinner. They'd been planning something involving this property, and my purchase had just complicated their plans in a major way. "Sheriff, is there something I should be worried about?" Tom was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Joe, I've been law enforcement in this county for 15 years. I've seen families do ugly things to each other over money and property. Just want you to know that if anything strange happens, anything at all, you call me directly." He handed me his card with his personal cell phone number written on the back. "And Joe, those security cameras you installed were a smart idea." 3 days after the closing, my father's truck roared up the gravel driveway like a thunderstorm. I was replacing some rotted boards on the front porch when Frank Brennan slammed his door hard enough to make the sound echo off the barn. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he shouted before he was halfway to the house. I set down my hammer and stood up slowly. "Good morning to you too, Dad." "Don't you good morning me, you little sneak. Martha Whitman just told half the town that you bought this place. With what money, Joe? Where did you get $120,000? The accusation in his voice cut deep, like the only way I could possibly have that much money was through something dishonest. "I saved it." "Saved it? On a ranch hand's salary? You expect me to believe you've been living like a monk for years just to buy some rundown property in the middle of nowhere?" "That's exactly what I've been doing." Frank walked up the porch steps, his face red with anger. "You should have consulted the family before making this kind of decision. This is the kind of investment that affects everyone." "How does my buying a ranch affect anyone but me?" "Because you clearly don't understand what you've gotten yourself into. You don't know anything about property management, about taxes, about maintaining 200 acres. You're going to lose your shirt, and then you'll come crying to me to bail you out." Before I could respond, Danny's silver sedan pulled up behind Dad's truck. My brother got out wearing his usual real estate agent uniform, pressed khakis, button-down shirt, and a smile that never reached his eyes. "Well, well," Danny said, walking up with his hands in his pockets. Little brother's been busy. Danny knew you were buying this place, Frank demanded. I had no idea, Danny lied smoothly. But Joe, I have to say this is concerning. I've been working with some clients who were very interested in this particular property. You've just complicated a deal that was months in the making. What kind of deal? Development opportunities. There are investors looking at this entire area for potential projects. You're buying this place as an individual owner makes it much harder to put together the kind of package buyers are looking for. Frank nodded, like this made perfect sense. See, you didn't think this through. You just saw some land and decided you wanted to play rancher without considering how it affects other people's business plans. Other people's business plans for my property. It wasn't your property when Danny's client started working on their development proposal, Frank shot back. You swooped in and bought it out from under legitimate business interests. I stared at both of them, understanding dawning like a cold sunrise. You've been planning to buy this place yourselves. Danny shrugged. I've been putting together an investment group. Nothing definite yet, but there was serious interest. Now that'll have to be restructured around your ownership. Unless, Frank said, you're willing to be reasonable about this. Reasonable how? Sell it to Danny's investment group for what you paid plus a small profit for your trouble. Say $130,000. You make $10,000 in a week and everyone's happy. The casual way he suggested I hand over my property for $10,000 profit told me everything I needed to know. They weren't angry that I'd bought land without consulting them. They were angry that I'd interfered with their own plans to make money from this property. I'm not selling. Frank's face went from red to purple. Don't be stupid, Joe. You're in over your head here. You don't have the experience or the capital to make this work. I'll figure it out. You'll figure it out. Danny laughed, but there was no humor in it. Joe, do you have any idea what it costs to maintain a property this size? Property taxes, insurance, utilities, maintenance. You're going to be broke within 6 months. Then that's my problem to solve. No. Frank said, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet tone he'd used when we were kids, and he was about to lose his temper. It becomes my problem when you fail and need family help. It becomes my problem when you default on whatever loans you took to buy this place, and it reflects on the Brennan family name. I didn't take any loans, I paid cash. Both men went quiet. Frank recovered first. Cash from where, Joe? From working 3 jobs for 5 years while living in a studio apartment and driving a truck that's old enough to vote. 3 jobs. Danny's voice was sharp. What 3 jobs? I told them about the ranch work, the bartending, and the carpentry projects, about saving every penny, about never taking vacations, about choosing work over everything else, because I had a goal. When I finished, Frank was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. You've been working 3 jobs for 5 years and never told us. You never asked what I did with my time. We thought you were just getting by. I was, getting by and saving money and working towards something. The conversation ended with Frank and Danny driving away in angry silence, but not before Danny made one final comment that chilled me to the bone. Joe, I hope you understand that family comes before individual ambition. Maybe you'll come around to seeing this situation differently. That night, I got an alert on my phone from the security system. A car had driven slowly past the main gate, then parked for several minutes before driving away. When I checked the footage, I recognized Danny's sedan. He came back the next night, this time with a passenger I didn't recognize. They parked at the end of my driveway and spent 20 minutes taking pictures with a camera that had a long telephoto lens. The third night, there were 3 vehicles. I called Sheriff Bradley. Tom, I think I need to talk to you about my family. The security alert on my phone buzzed at 9:47 in the morning while I was in town picking up supplies at Henderson's feed store. 3 vehicles in my driveway, Frank's truck, Danny's sedan, and a white SUV I didn't recognize. I pulled over and opened the security app, watching the live feed with growing disbelief. My father and brother were walking around my property with a man in an expensive gray suit, pointing at different buildings and sections of land like they were giving a tour. I drove home fast enough to kick up a dust cloud that probably violated every safe driving rule my father had ever taught me. By the time I got there, the three men had moved from the exterior of my property to the interior of my house. They'd broken in. I parked behind the white SUV, effectively blocking it in, and walked through my own front door to find strangers rifling through my personal belongings. What the hell is going on here? The man in the gray suit looked up from my kitchen table where he'd spread out several official-looking documents. He was maybe 50, with perfectly styled hair and the kind of confident smile that usually came with a law degree. "You must be Joe," he said, extending his hand like we were meeting at a business lunch. "Marcus Webb Realty and Investment Services. Your family asked me to take a look at the property." I ignored his hand. "My family asked you to break into my house. Now, Joe," Frank said, his voice taking on that patient tone he used when he thought I was being unreasonable, "we're not breaking in. We're family. We have a right to be concerned about this investment you've made. You have a right to be on my property without permission. We have a responsibility," Danny corrected, "to make sure you understand what you've gotten yourself into. Marcus here is an expert in property development. He's been explaining some things about this land that you need to hear." Marcus Webb cleared his throat and gestured to the papers on my table. "Joe, I've been working with your brother to put together a comprehensive analysis of this property. The good news is that your instincts were right. This land has significant potential value. The bad news," Frank continued, "is that you're not equipped to realize that value on your own." I looked at the papers Marcus had spread out. Property surveys, geological reports, financial projections, and what looked like preliminary contracts. "Where did you get geological reports on my land?" "These are public records," Marcus said smoothly. "Available to anyone who knows where to look. The State Geological Survey conducted mineral assessments on this entire region 3 years ago. One of the reports was stamped with a logo I didn't recognize. Blackstone Petroleum Development, LLC. What's Blackstone Petroleum? Danny and Marcus exchanged a look that lasted just a second too long. They're a development company that specializes in mineral rights acquisition, Marcus explained. They've been quietly buying up properties in this area for potential oil and gas development. They want to buy my land. They want to lease the mineral rights, Danny said, for a very generous upfront payment plus ongoing royalties. But the contracts are complicated, Joe. The kind of thing you need experienced representation to handle. Frank nodded seriously. That's why we brought Marcus in. He's worked with Blackstone before. He knows how to structure these deals to maximize the benefit for the landowner. I picked up one of the contracts and tried to read the legal language. It was dense and confusing, full of terms I didn't understand, and clauses that seemed to contradict each other. How much money are we talking about? Initial lease payment would be $200,000, Marcus said, plus 15% royalties on any oil or gas extracted. Depending on what's actually under the ground, you could be looking at millions of dollars over the life of the lease. Millions of dollars. The number hit me like a physical force. But, Danny added quickly, there are some complications with the current ownership structure. What kind of complications? Marcus pulled out another set of papers. Well, Joe, the way you finance this purchase creates some legal concerns. Taking on this level of debt to buy property, especially when you lack experience in land management, could be seen as financially irresponsible. I didn't take on any debt, I paid cash. Yes, but where did that cash come from? Frank asked. You withdrew your entire life savings to buy this place. That's exactly the kind of impulsive decision-making that concerns potential business partners. I felt like I was in some kind of alternate reality where saving money and buying property was evidence of poor judgment. Marcus has been explaining the legal framework for these mineral rights deals, Danny continued. Because of the amounts of money involved, Blackstone requires certain guarantees about the mental competency and financial stability of the property owners they contract with. Mental competency. It's standard language, Marcus assured me quickly. Just a way to protect all parties involved. But given your employment history, your lack of experience with large financial transactions, and the impulsive way you purchased this property, there might be some questions. Frank leaned forward. Joe, what we're proposing is that you transfer ownership of the property to a family trust. That way Danny can handle the negotiations with Blackstone as the trustee, and you'll still benefit from any deals that get made. But I won't own my own land anymore. You'll own a share of the trust, Danny explained patiently. Same financial benefit, but with proper legal and business management. I looked around my kitchen at 3 men who were calmly discussing taking away my property while sitting in my house without permission. And if I don't want to set up this trust, the silence that followed was answer enough. Joe. Marcus said finally, I have to tell you that Blackstone is prepared to move forward with development in this area, with or without your participation. They have options on several adjacent properties. If you're not part of the development plan, you could find yourself surrounded by industrial activity with no compensation. They can do that. Mineral rights law is complicated, Danny said. If they have legitimate leases on neighboring properties, there are ways to access mineral deposits that cross property lines. I felt trapped in a nightmare where everyone was speaking English, but I couldn't understand what they were really saying. I need to think about this. Of course, Marcus said, gathering up his papers. But Joe, timing is important here. Blackstone is finalizing their development plans for this area. If you want to be part of the initial round of contracts, we need to move quickly. How quickly? I'd recommend we have the trust paperwork finalized by the end of the week. After they left, I sat alone in my kitchen trying to process what had just happened. My family had brought a stranger into my house to explain why I wasn't capable of owning my own property. They'd presented a solution that involved me giving up ownership and trusting them to manage my interests. And they'd made it sound like they were doing me a favor. I called the one person I trusted to give me straight answers. Sheriff Bradley. It's Joe Brennan. I think I need help understanding something legal. What's going on, Joe? My family just tried to convince me to give them my ranch. There was a long pause. Joe, I think you and I need to have a conversation in person. Can you meet me at my office in an hour? Is this about more than just my family? I'm afraid it might be. Sheriff Bradley's office smelled like coffee and old paperwork. He closed the door behind me and gestured to a chair across from his desk, his expression more serious than I'd ever seen it. Joe, before we start, I need you to know that this conversation is going to sound like something out of a crime movie, but everything I'm about to tell you is real, and it's been building for months. He pulled out a thick file folder and set it between us. 3 weeks ago, I got a call from the FBI field office in Denver. They've been investigating a property fraud scheme that's been operating across several western states. The basic pattern is always the same. Identify rural properties with potential mineral value, pressure the owners into questionable deals, then use legal manipulation to take control of the land for a fraction of its worth. My mouth went dry. And you think my family? I think your family got approached by the people running this scheme. The question is whether they're victims or participants. Tom opened the folder and pulled out several photographs. The first was of Marcus Webb shaking hands with my brother Danny outside a restaurant in Billings. This was taken 2 months ago. Webb's not just a local realtor, Joe. He's part of a network that's been operating across Montana, Wyoming, and North Dakota. They identify landowners who might be vulnerable to pressure, then use family members or trusted community figures to initiate contact. The next photo showed Marcus Webb with 2 other men in expensive suits standing in front of a building with Blackstone Petroleum Development LLC on the sign. Blackstone Petroleum is a shell company. They've never actually developed any oil or gas properties. What they do is get landowners to sign over mineral rights for upfront payments, then immediately resell those rights to legitimate energy companies for 10 times what they paid. So the lease deals they're offering are real, but at a tiny fraction of what the rights are actually worth. Joe, if there really are oil deposits under your land, the mineral rights could be worth millions. But Marcus Webb would have you sign them over for $200,000, then turn around and sell them to ExxonMobil for $5 million. Tom pulled out another document, a legal filing with my name on it. This morning, someone filed paperwork with the county court suggesting that you might not be mentally competent to manage large financial transactions. It's the first step in a process that could result in a court-appointed guardian taking control of your property. I stared at the papers, feeling sick. My father filed this. It was filed by a lawyer named Richard Stone. Stone has been working with Webb on similar cases across 3 states, but the information in the filing could only have come from someone who knows your personal, financial history. Danny. He knows about my savings, about how I bought the property. Joe, I need to ask you something directly. Has anyone in your family suggested that you transfer ownership of your property to a trust or some other legal entity we knew? I told him about the conversation that morning about the family trust proposal, about how they'd made it sound like I was too inexperienced to handle mineral rights negotiations myself. Tom nodded grimly. That's step 2 in the process. Get you to voluntarily transfer ownership to a structure they control, then use that control to sign deals that benefit them rather than you. But they're my family. Why would they? Money changes people, Joe. We're talking about potentially millions of dollars. That's enough to make people rationalize a lot of bad behavior. Tom leaned back in his chair, studying my face. Joe, I need to tell you something else. The FBI agent running this investigation wants to meet with you. Her name is Jessica Torres. The name hit me like lightning. Jessica Torres, the lawyer who handled my property purchase. Tom smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. Agent Torres has been working undercover for 8 months, building cases against the Webb network. When you hired her to handle your ranch purchase, it was the break she'd been waiting for. She's been documenting everything: the geological surveys, the shell companies, the legal manipulation tactics. So she knew about the oil deposits under my property. She suspected. But more importantly, she knew that Webb and his associates would eventually target you. Your property purchase put you directly in their crosshairs. Tom pulled out his phone and made a call. Jessica. He's here. Can you come over to my office? 20 minutes later, the woman I'd known as Jessica Torres' property lawyer walked into Sheriff Bradley's office wearing an FBI jacket and carrying a badge. Joe, I'm sorry for the deception, but your case is the key to bringing down a criminal network that's stolen millions of dollars from rural landowners across the western United States. She sat down across from me, her demeanor completely different from the professional but friendly lawyer I'd worked with weeks earlier. The good news is that we have enough evidence to arrest Webb Stone and their associates. The bad news is that your family members might be facing criminal charges too, depending on how deep their involvement goes. What kind of charges? Conspiracy to commit fraud, property theft, possibly racketeering if we can prove they've done this before. Joe, we need your help to complete this investigation. Jessica explained the plan. I would pretend to go along with the family trust proposal, but instead of actually signing over my property, I'd be wearing recording equipment to document their attempts at manipulation and fraud. The mineral rights under your property are worth approximately $4.7 million, Jessica said. Webb's network was planning to acquire those rights for $200,000, then immediately sell them to Continental Resources for the full value. $4.7 million. Minimum. Possibly more depending on the actual size of the oil deposit. Tom leaned forward. Joe, I know this is a lot to process, but we need you to understand that your family has been planning this for months. The Christmas disinvitation, the pressure to sell your property, the mental competency filing, it's all part of a coordinated effort to separate you from what could be generational wealth. I sat in silence for several minutes, trying to reconcile the people I'd grown up with and the criminals Jessica and Tom were describing. What happens to my family if I cooperate with you? That depends on what they actually do over the next few days, Jessica said. If they're just being manipulated by Webb and Stone and they back off when they understand what's really happening, they might avoid serious charges. But if they continue trying to defraud you out of your property, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Tom said, there's one more thing you need to know. We've been monitoring communications between Webb and his associates. They're planning to move very quickly. As in, they want this wrapped up within 48 hours. Why so fast? because Continental Resources is scheduled to begin development activities in this area next month. Once that starts, it becomes much harder to hide the true value of mineral rights in the region. Jessica handed me a small device that looked like a pen. This is a digital recorder. If you're willing to help us, we'd like you to go along with whatever your family proposes tomorrow. Act like you're convinced by their arguments, but get them to explain the details of their plan on tape. And then we finish this. I looked at both of them, federal law enforcement officers, asking me to help them build a case against my own father and brother. What if you're wrong about them? What if they really think they're helping me? Tom and Jessica exchanged a look. Chuna, Tom said gently, your brother Danny has done this before. 2 years ago in Wyoming, an elderly rancher named Bill Morrison signed over his mineral rights to a family trust that Danny managed. Bill Morrison thought he was getting 15% royalties on oil development. What he actually got was 15% of the first year's production, while Danny sold the long-term rights for $3.8 million. Danny's done this to other people. 5 times that we can prove, Jessica said. Your brother isn't a victim, Joe. He's one of the primary operators in this network. And Dad, we're not sure yet, but he filed the mental competency paperwork. That's not something you do accidentally. I took the recording device and put it in my pocket. What do I need to do? The next morning, Danny called at 7:30. Joe, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. I know it's a lot to process, but I want you to understand that this mineral rights deal could set you up for life. I've been thinking about it too, I said, making sure the recording device was activated. But I still have questions. Of course you do. That's why I want to bring Marcus Webb back out to the ranch this morning. He can explain all the details, walk you through the contracts, make sure you understand exactly what you'd be signing. Just the 3 of us? Actually, Dad wants to be there too. This is a family decision and he wants to make sure we're all on the same page. 2 hours later, the same 3 vehicles pulled into my driveway. This time, though, I had Sheriff Bradley and Agent Torres positioned at locations where they could monitor everything that happened on my property. Marcus Webb carried a leather briefcase and wore a different expensive suit, this one dark blue with a red tie that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Joe, I'm glad you've decided to move forward with this, he said, setting the briefcase on my kitchen table. I think you're going to be very happy with the terms we've worked out. Frank sat down across from me, his expression more serious than I'd ever seen it. Son, this is the kind of opportunity that comes along once in a lifetime. Your mother and I have been talking, and we want to make sure you handle this right. Danny pulled out a chair next to Marcus. The trust structure is going to protect you from a lot of potential problems, Joe. Legal liability, tax complications, management responsibilities. With me handling the business side of things, you can just focus on enjoying the benefits. Marcus opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of documents. Let's start with the mineral rights lease. Blackstone Petroleum is prepared to offer $200,000 up front plus 15% royalties on all oil and gas extracted from the property. That sounds good, I said, playing my part. It is good, Danny agreed. But Joe, there are some complications with the current ownership structure that we need to address first. What kind of complications? Frank leaned forward. Well, son, the way you purchased this property has raised some red flags with the petroleum company. Spending your entire life savings on a speculative land purchase, especially without consulting family or financial advisors, makes them nervous about your decision-making capabilities. They're concerned about my mental state. Not exactly, Marcus said quickly. But large corporations are very risk-averse when it comes to long-term contracts. They need assurance that the people they're dealing with are going to make sound business decisions throughout the life of the agreement. Danny pulled out another set of papers. That's where the family trust comes in. By transferring ownership to a trust structure with me as the managing trustee, we eliminate any concerns about individual competency or financial management. But I'd still own the land. You'd be the primary beneficiary of the trust, Marcus explained. Same financial benefits, but with professional management and legal protection. I pretended to read through the trust documents, taking my time to give the recording device a chance to capture every detail of their pitch. How exactly would this work? Danny spread the papers out so I could see them better. You sign here to transfer ownership of the property to the Brennan Family Trust. I sign here to accept the role of managing trustee. Then I sign the mineral rights lease with Blackstone Petroleum on behalf of the trust. And I get the money. You get your share of the money, Frank corrected. Remember, this is a family trust. Your mother and I have contributed to your success over the years, helped you get where you are today. The trust structure recognizes that this is a family asset. What's my share? 60%, Danny said, which is very generous considering you'd be getting professional management of the asset at no additional cost. 60% of my own land. They were planning to steal 40% of whatever deals they made, plus control over all future decisions. What about ongoing decisions if there are other opportunities, other offers, Yumi? That's the beauty of the trust structure, Marcus explained. Danny handles all of that as the trustee. You don't have to worry about complicated negotiations or legal documentation. Just collect your checks and enjoy the benefits. Frank nodded approvingly. It's really the perfect solution, Joe. You get the financial benefits without any of the headaches. I looked around at the three men who were calmly explaining how they planned to steal my property and make it sound like they were doing me a favor. There's just one thing I'm still confused about. What's that? Danny asked. If the mineral rights are worth so much money, why does Blackstone need to lease them instead of buying the property outright? Marcus and Danny exchanged a quick glance. Well, Marcus said carefully, leasing arrangements are more common in the petroleum industry. It allows the landowner to maintain ownership while still benefiting from resource development. But hypothetically, if someone wanted to buy the mineral rights outright, what would they be worth? Another glance between Marcus and Danny. It's hard to say, Danny answered. The value would depend on a lot of factors. How much oil is actually there, how easy it is to extract market conditions. But roughly, Frank was starting to look impatient. Joe, why does that matter? You're getting a guaranteed $200,000 plus ongoing royalties. That's more money than you've ever seen in your life. I know, Dad. I'm just trying to understand the full picture. Marcus cleared his throat. Joe, I think you're overthinking this. The lease offer is generous and it's time-sensitive. Blackstone has other properties they're considering if this one becomes too complicated. How time-sensitive? They need an answer today, Danny said. The development schedule for this area has already been finalized. If you're not part of the initial round of contracts, you might not get another opportunity. I pretended to consider this, letting the silence stretch out while the recording device captured their increasing pressure. Okay, I said finally. I'll sign the trust papers. The relief on all three faces was immediate and obvious. Excellent choice, Marcus said, pulling out a pen. Let's get this finalized. I was reaching for the pen when my phone rang, Sheriff Bradley's number. I should probably take this, I said. Joe, can't it wait? Frank asked. We're right in the middle of something important here. It'll just take a second. I answered the phone, and Tom's voice filled the kitchen through the speaker. Joe, this is Sheriff Bradley. I'm outside your house with federal agents. We need to speak with you and your visitors immediately. The color drained from Marcus Webb's face. Federal agents? Danny's voice cracked slightly. Joe, Frank said, his voice taking on that dangerous, quiet tone. What's going on here? I stood up and walked to the front door, opening it to reveal Sheriff Bradley, Agent Torres, and three other federal agents in FBI jackets. Gentlemen, I said, turning back to my kitchen full of criminals, I'd like you to meet Agent Jessica Torres of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You might remember her as the lawyer who handled my property purchase. Marcus Webb was already reaching for his briefcase, but Agent Torres stepped into the kitchen with her badge visible. Marcus Webb, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, property theft, and racketeering. The next few minutes were a blur of handcuffs, Miranda warnings, and my father and brother staring at me with expressions of complete shock and betrayal. Joe, Frank said as Agent Torres cuffed his hands behind his back. What have you done? I protected my property, Dad, from my own family. Danny was still trying to talk his way out of the situation as they led him to a federal vehicle. This is all a misunderstanding. We were trying to help Joe make a good financial decision. Agent Torres turned to me as the last of the arrestees was loaded into cars. Joe, the mineral rights under your property are worth $4.7 million. Your family and their associates were planning to acquire them for $200,000, then immediately resell them to Continental Resources. So I really am a millionaire? You're going to be. Continental Resources is very interested in negotiating a legitimate lease for your mineral rights, at fair market value. As the federal vehicles drove away with my father, brother, and Marcus Webb in custody, I sat alone on my front porch, trying to process what had just happened. I'd saved my ranch, exposed a criminal conspiracy, and apparently become wealthy in the process. But I'd also just sent my own family to federal prison. 6 months later, I stood in the same courtroom where Frank Brennan, Danny Brennan, Marcus Webb, and lawyer Richard Stone received their sentences for conspiracy to commit fraud and property theft. Marcus Webb got 8 years in federal prison. Richard Stone got 6 years. My brother Danny, because he'd cooperated with federal investigators and helped them uncover similar schemes in other states, got 3 years. My father got 2 years, but the judge suspended 18 months of his sentence in recognition of the fact that he'd been manipulated by more experienced criminals. As Frank stood to hear his sentence, he looked across the courtroom at me for the first time since his arrest. There was no anger in his eyes anymore, just something that looked like shame. After the sentencing, I met with Agent Torres one final time at Sheriff Bradley's office. The Continental Resources lease is finalized, she told me, sliding a contract across Tom's desk. $4.7 million up front plus 22% royalties on all oil and gas extracted. It's the largest mineral rights deal in county history. And the other victims? 14 families across 5 states are getting their property back or receiving compensation for what was stolen from them. Your cooperation made that possible, Joe. Sheriff Bradley leaned back in his chair, smiling. Joe, I've got some news that might interest you. The county commissioners want to offer you a position as a property fraud prevention coordinator. Help other landowners avoid what almost happened to you. What would that involve? Education programs, legal resource development, working with families who might be targeted by these kinds of schemes. The pay isn't much, but it would be meaningful work. I thought about it. Can I do it part-time? I've got a ranch to run. Speaking of which, Jessica said, what are your plans for the property now? The question I'd been asking myself for months. What do you do when you suddenly own land worth millions of dollars when your family is in prison? When everything you thought you knew about your life has changed? I'm going to ranch cattle, I said, like I always planned. The oil money will be nice, but this was never about getting rich quick. I bought this land because I wanted to build something real. Tom nodded approvingly. And Lisa. My girlfriend had stood by me through the entire investigation, the media attention, the family drama, and the legal proceedings. She'd been the one constant in a year that had turned my world upside down. We're getting married next month. Small ceremony, just close friends. Sheriff Bradley, I hope you'll be there. Wouldn't miss it. Jessica gathered up her papers and stood to leave. Joe, there's one more thing. Your mother wanted me to give you this. She handed me a letter in my mother's handwriting. I waited until I was alone in my truck to read it. Dear Joe, it began. I know you'll probably never forgive me for what your father and I did, and I'm not writing this letter to ask for forgiveness. I'm writing to tell you that I'm proud of you. She went on to explain that she'd had no idea about the criminal conspiracy, that she'd thought Frank and Danny were genuinely trying to help me make good financial decisions. She talked about the shame she felt about how she was getting counseling to understand how she'd been manipulated, about how she hoped someday we might be able to rebuild our relationship. You showed more character in 6 months than I showed in 60 years, she wrote. You chose to do what was right even when it cost you your family. That takes a kind of strength I never had. The letter ended with her new address in Billings, where she'd moved after Frank's arrest, and an invitation to call her if I ever felt ready to talk. I sat in my truck outside the courthouse, holding my mother's letter and thinking about forgiveness, about family, about the difference between the people who share your blood and the people who earn your trust. 3 weeks later, Lisa and I hosted our wedding reception at the ranch. Sheriff Bradley served as my best man, and Jessica Torres flew in from Denver to attend. Martha Whitman, who'd become like a grandmother to both of us, insisted on making the cake. During the reception, as I watched my chosen family celebrating on the land I'd worked so hard to buy, I realized that the greatest lesson from this whole experience wasn't about money or property or even justice. It was about the difference between being related to people and actually belonging with them. The Continental Resources Oil Development Project began that fall, bringing jobs to the area and royalty payments that would secure my future for generations. But the real success was simpler. I woke up every morning on my own land with a wife who respected my dreams, surrounded by people who'd proven their loyalty when it mattered most. My father was released from federal prison after 8 months and moved to Arizona to live with his sister. We exchanged Christmas cards, now brief and polite. Danny served his full 3-year sentence and now works as a construction foreman in Oregon. We don't communicate at all. My mother and I talk on the phone once a month. It's awkward and careful, but it's something. She's never seen the ranch, but she's asked about it, and I think someday she might visit. The property fraud prevention coordinator job turned out to be exactly what I needed. I spend 3 days a week helping other families understand their rights, spot potential scams, and make informed decisions about their land. The work gives meaning to what happened to me, turns my painful experience into something that protects other people. 6 months after the wedding, Lisa and I were sitting on the front porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple, when she asked me a question that stopped me cold. "Joe, do you ever regret it? Buying this place, I mean, everything that happened with your family." I thought about it for a long moment, listening to the wind through the cottonwood trees and the distant sound of oil pumps working the land that had almost been stolen from me. "No," I said finally. "I regret that they made the choices they made. I regret that money turned them into people I didn't recognize, but I don't regret standing up for myself. Even though it cost you your family." "Lisa, they weren't my family anymore the moment they decided to steal from me. Family doesn't try to take advantage of you. Family doesn't lie to you or manipulate you or file legal papers claiming you're mentally incompetent." She nodded, understanding. "So what is family then?" I gestured around the ranch, thinking about Tom Bradley teaching me local history, about Jessica Torres risking her career to protect people like me, about Martha Whitman treating me like the grandson she never had. Family is the people who show up when you need them. Family is the people who celebrate your success instead of trying to steal it. Family is the people who tell you the truth, even when it's hard to hear. That night, as we lay in bed in the house I'd bought with my own hard-earned money, I thought about the Christmas dinner I'd been excluded from almost a year earlier. The gathering where I hadn't been good enough, successful enough, respectable enough for my own father's business associates. I wondered what Frank would say if he could see me now. Married, financially secure, respected in the community, doing work that mattered. All because I'd been brave enough to buy a ranch and stubborn enough to keep it when people tried to take it away. The next Christmas, Lisa and I hosted dinner at our ranch for Sheriff Bradley and his wife, for Jessica Torres and her family, who drove up from Denver for Martha Whitman, and for 3 other families I'd helped through the property fraud prevention program. We sat around a table in a dining room that had almost been stolen from me, sharing stories and laughter and the kind of easy comfort that comes from being with people who know your whole story and still choose to be there. Before dinner, Tom Bradley asked if I wanted to say a few words. I stood up, looking around at the faces of people who'd become more than friends, who'd become the family I'd chosen instead of the one I'd been born into. A year ago, I said, "My biological father told me I wasn't successful enough to eat Christmas dinner with his friends. Tonight I'm eating Christmas dinner with people who've seen me at my worst and still call me family. People who stood by me when my own blood relatives tried to steal everything I'd worked for." I raised my glass of apple cider. Here's to learning the difference between the people who share your DNA and the people who share your life. Here's to choosing loyalty over biology character, over convenience, and truth over comfort. Here's to family. As everyone raised their glasses and echoed, "To family," I realized that the best revenge against people who'd tried to steal my future had been building a better one without them. The ranch that Frank and Danny had tried to take became the foundation for everything good in my life. The land they'd dismissed as worthless made me wealthy, but more importantly, it made me free. Free to choose who mattered to me. Free to build relationships based on respect instead of obligation. Free to define success by my own standards instead of someone else's expectations. Sometimes the greatest gift life gives you is showing you who people really are when money gets involved. My father and brother showed me they were willing to steal from family for profit. But Tom Bradley, Jessica Torres and Martha Whitman showed me they were willing to protect a stranger because it was right. 6 years later, as I write this story from the desk in my ranch house office, I can see oil pumps working the land that produces enough royalties to support 3 generations of my future family. Lisa and I have 2 daughters now, and they'll grow up on land that their father fought to keep surrounded by people who chose to be part of their lives. Every morning when I wake up, I remember that I own this place, because I was brave enough to dream bigger than my family thought I deserved. I kept it because I was strong enough to stand up to people who thought they could take advantage of me. And I'm happy here because I learned that the most important choice you can make in life is not who you're born to, but who you choose to trust with your heart. That's a lesson worth more than all the oil in Montana. I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what you knew was right? Have you ever discovered that the people closest to you weren't the people you could trust the most? Share your story in the comments below, because I've learned that the most powerful thing about surviving betrayal is helping other people understand they're not alone. If this story reminded you that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand up for yourself, even against family, please give it a like. And if you believe that real family is about respect and loyalty rather than just blood relations, please subscribe to hear more stories about people who chose courage over comfort. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that they deserve better than people who try to take advantage of them, whether those people are family or not. Sometimes the best thing you can do for someone you care about is help them understand that they have the right to protect themselves, even from the people who are supposed to protect them. Thank you for listening to my story and for understanding that justice isn't just about what happens in courtrooms. Sometimes justice is simply having the courage to choose the life you deserve instead of accepting the life other people think you should settle for. I hope you find your own ranch, whatever that looks like for you, and I hope you find people who celebrate your success instead of trying to steal it.